Hello everybody, this is Raspberry Barrel here, and today we'll be reading the much-awaited biography of Neptune Butterfly, one of my Queens of Mewni. I hope you're all excited. It has been a wait, and I hope it's worth the wait. And thank you all for being here. I really hope you enjoy this biography. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background. Let's begin. Neptune the Compassionate. Beauty, elegance, and poise she carries with her always, but most of all she has to show, her love for all amazes. Neptune Butterfly, born 11:32 a.m., died 11:70 a.m., reigned from 1149 through 1170 a.m., married to John Flameson, children Astrid Butterfly. Neptune Florencia Butterfly was born on a wonderful night of Thurk 73rd, 1132, daughter to Queen Destiny Butterfly and King Thomas More. She was born with blue water droplets on her cheeks, a small head of cookie brown hair of her father, and her mother's blue eyes. She seemed to inherit relatively none of her parents' spiritual genes, not portraying any shadow demon traits or abilities, and few signs of her father's tree spirit heritage. Neptune did not have too much time to experience being an only child, because shortly after her birth, the queen became pregnant once again, resulting in the birth of her twin siblings, Mars and Lyra, in 1133. Mars and Lyra were fraternal twins, and so did not bear much resemblance. Lyra had sunlight golden hair and turquoise eyes, while Mars had orange-brown hair and green eyes. Both twins seemed to inherit most of their physical traits from their father's side of the family. Neptune grew up never being alone, always having someone with her. She had her parents, her siblings, her aunts and uncles, her cousins, and her grandparents. Although it was clear Neptune and her siblings' traits came from their father, the family still liked to joke about them actually coming from their grand-aunt Athena's line due to bearing little in common with Queen Destiny. Neptune's final sister Sky was born in 1135. Neptune was only 3, but finally had some understanding of her world and couldn't wait to hold her and be the bestest big sister. Sky looked the most like Neptune, and so Neptune felt a special way for her youngest sister. She loved helping out and playing with all of her younger siblings and cousins. She also enjoyed when her mother would take them all on playdates to this wonderful flower field, where she'd get to see one of her mom's friend's daughters, who she liked to call Stelly. The playdates would only last until they were 8, getting less each year until finally ceasing. Neptune would grow into quite the extrovert and people person due to all the contact and interaction she had growing up. She loved interacting with her people. Her mother would take her down the town streets and into the markets, and she would smile and wave to everyone. She went on a trip once a month to pick flowers from her favorite shop. It was there that she made friends with the shop owner's daughter, Lily Frazier, and they became good friends fast. When Neptune was 9 in 1141, she and her siblings would be playing a game of hide-and-seek one winter night. They were running around the house laughing and screaming, roughhousing yet playful. Neptune was it to be the seeker. She held her hands on her face and began to count to 20. When she was about to get to 5, she heard a scream, but it didn't sound as playful. She stopped counting, removing her hands and listening. "Mom, Dad, Neptune, someone get up here, to the guest room in the back of the hall." It came from Mars. She started running towards the room. Lyra came out and Neptune sent her to go retrieve their parents. Neptune made her way to the room. It was a guest bedroom the farthest down the hall, almost never used, usually just held storage nowadays. She made it to the room. The door was already open. She rushed in to ask her brother what was wrong, but he was frozen. She tried to shake him and ask what was wrong, but then she saw that he was staring at something. She looked over and her eyes went wide. Sitting there in the corner of the room, in front of an old wardrobe, was a little girl. She had sky blue hair and wore a light white tunic, but she was all wet. Most surprising of all was that the girl had cheek marks. Now Neptune had seen plenty of people with cheek marks, but they were all part of the family in one way or another. But Neptune had never seen this girl before. The girl was just sitting on the floor, quietly crying to herself, only making herself more wet. Neptune went over to her to ask her what was wrong, but the girl looked afraid. "Hi there," Neptune started. "Who are you? Why are you in our castle? And why are you all wet?" But the girl just cried more and said she didn't know where she was or what her name was. Neptune and Mars started to comfort her while they waited for their parents. Lyra and Queen Destiny soon came to the room. Lyra gasped at the sight of the girl. The queen's eyes also widened a bit, but she made no move to show her true thoughts. She simply told her children to return to playing, but not hide and seek right now, and that she would speak to the girl quickly. Neptune was puzzled, but knew her mom would figure it out. They waited a bit until finally the queen came back into the room with her hand on the girl's shoulder. The girl still looked sad, but she had calmed down a lot, and the queen had given her some new clothes. "This is Wardrobe, everyone. She'll be staying with us for the time being," the queen said. Neptune was once again puzzled. Why were they letting the strange girl, Wardrobe, stay with them? She was puzzled, but pushed it down, never sad to make a new friend. She put on her smile and welcomed Wardrobe to the castle. Neptune would later that night ask her mother what she had said and learned of Wardrobe, and why she was staying. The queen simply told her that Wardrobe was a daughter of an old friend and couldn't go back, and so would be part of the family from now on. The queen then asked her if she would be up to the role of helping Wardrobe adapt and fit in, welcome her to their family, and Neptune nodded her head. She never turned someone away, especially not a new sister, and so from there on then, Wardrobe was considered part of the butterfly family, but was still treated and dressed lower than the true bloods. The next major event to happen would be the assassination/murder of her grandmother Plutoa in 1143. Neptune never got to know her grandmother well. It actually seemed like destiny tried to keep her children away from her. Although it didn't affect her much, she still mourned for the loss of her family and did all she could to be there for her mother and grandaunt Athena. As the siblings aged, they all developed their own traits. Mars was stubborn and headstrong, but he and Wardrobe loved to draw and paint together. Lyra was a lot like her twin, also headstrong and stubborn at times. She also had the habit of being quite sassy. She loved to sing and play music, and so fit in wonderfully with her cousins and aunts. Sky grew up to be very shy and anxious, and took comfort in Neptune's presence and comfort. Sky also liked to draw, but thought her drawings weren't anywhere as good as her siblings, so often hid her work. Besides drawing, Sky liked to sew, which was something she did often with Neptune. As for Neptune herself, she liked everything nature. She loved to run in the wind, play in the flowers, and climb in the trees. She loved visiting the creeks and the woods and feeding the fish. She loved to dance as well, taking ballet classes, but also improvising and teaching herself. She loved spending time with people, speaking to her subjects, helping them how she could, and looking into their woes so she could try to bring it up to her mother and the council. She and Lily continued to be friends as they grew, and Neptune stood up for her a lot against other kids who bullied her. There were a lot of mean boys who made fun of her for some reason, and tried to convince her Neptune only liked her due to pity, but Neptune told her it wasn't true. It just so happened more often than not that these were the same boys who were going after Neptune, finding her beautiful and wanting her attention. Ah yes, that was another of Neptune's gifts. As Neptune aged, the people said she grew more and more beautiful. When she turned 12 and chose her signature style, her mother came up to her and smiled, saying she looked like the reincarnation of the ancient Queen Irene. Many lords and ladies wanted to have her wed to their sons, princes wanting her hand, and other boys just wanting her attention. Neptune could see through all of them, though, and could tell that they were only interested in her because of her beauty, and so always turned them down. If they seemed like a kind boy, she'd give them a chance, and she tried to teach all of them that beauty isn't everything. It's beauty from within. Neptune would later help Sky with boy advice once Sky turned 15, helping her find her future man. In 1145, her siblings and cousins would all leave to go to school in Epidaurus with her grandaunt. Neptune was sad that they all had to go so far. She couldn't go due to her studies at the castle to become queen. Neptune was promised she would be able to visit, and they'd visit her often. It was one of the only things keeping her from crying. She had never felt this lonely before, had always been surrounded by people, and didn't know how to live being so alone. And so she threw herself into her studies, and continued to go out and see and talk to her people. She befriended more people, especially her future ministers. She made good friends with Isabella Miltree, Eleanor Reeve, and Darcy Porter. She also started dating Glenn Rowan, not long after befriending him. One of his friends was Lawrence Ellis, who unfortunately was one of the ruder people she met, who also seemed to have his eyes on her, but she paid him no mind. She had lots of fun with her new friends and learned a lot from all of them. She was happy her minister friends were also kind and hung out with Lily. Together they made a lot of great plans for the future of their kingdom. Upon the approaching date of her 14th birthday and wand ceremony, Neptune couldn't be more excited. She would finally get the wand, and also would get to see her siblings again soon. Getting the wand was the next step in her training to become queen, and it was a big symbol to her people of what her legacy would be. Neptune was slightly disappointed when it seemed her mother wasn't as excited for the event as she was. She guessed her mom might just not want to give up the wand and book. But surely she would be excited for the future of her daughter. Why did she seem so clouded? Her 14th birthday came, and she had a grand ceremony. When her mother passed the scissor wand to her, it swirled and turned into a beautiful hand mirror. The people thought it was to symbolize her beauty and elegance, but Neptune could tell it was something more. During the dances of the party, she took a dance with Glenn. They laughed and were having a great time, when suddenly Neptune looked over at the mirror in her hand and saw that Glenn's reflection was surrounded in a green aura. She looked around and there was no such thing in the room. She questioned what it was, but tried to put it in the back of her mind and enjoy the party. Then, when she went over to the rest of her friends and hugged them, she could see a blue aura in the reflection around them all. She wondered once more what it could be and mean. It was later that night, and she went to one of the upper bathrooms to get some quiet. It was then that she found Glenn making out with one of the Coleman girls in the bathroom, not even managing to lock the door. She gasped and furrowed her brows. She made her presence known and shouted at him, breaking up and telling him to stay away from her. It was that night that she learned her wand could read people's hearts, their auras, their intentions, and make it known to her. Overall, she tried to tell herself that it was just a great learning opportunity for her. It was an interesting first boyfriend. She really thought he was better than the other boys going after her. But she was wrong, and she wouldn't let it happen again. Neptune's siblings started to come home more often after that, both to make sure she was okay and because they had less work as they finished their semesters and wanted to see her. She loved practicing her wand with them. She liked me fine enough, but we never really clicked. She even let her siblings hold and try their own spells with the wand, watching it shift into their own forms. Let's just say it was a mess, fun but chaotic. Her siblings really appreciated how kind she was and really missed her, promising to come more often. Unfortunately, later that year, one of the worst snowstorms to ever happen occurred. It left people trapped, the roads not being able to be plowed. It just kept snowing, and Destiny's magic couldn't clean it up in time, nor could it stop the storm. She could put up barriers around the kingdom, but they would only last so long, so there was limited time for people to try and achieve things before the storm increased again. Neptune's siblings were all stuck in Epidaurus, with no way for either of them to see the others. It became worse when people began to become sick from the cold. It wasn't your regular cold, so they weren't able to treat it the same, and people were becoming sick too quickly. Horror struck once people started dying from their illnesses. It started slow, but in a blink of an eye it went above the charts. They needed a cure, and so put together a meeting for what could be done. Queen Destiny and her council, as well as the nurses and doctors involved, all found and discussed what they thought could stop the pandemic. There were two very important pieces they need for this to work: the Queen's magic and the rare moon bloom flower that was said to be used in the cure to the last Mewni plague. They had none of the flowers in hand or storage, so they needed to travel to the edge of the Mewni continent into the depths of an ancient forest to retrieve the flower. Queen Destiny had planned to portal there, but she didn't know the exact coordinates they were going, and to their horror began to become sick herself and was becoming weak. Neptune wasn't supposed to be listening to their meeting, but she had to. She was going to be the future queen of these people who would die if nothing was done. When the meeting room went quiet, she walked in, volunteering herself to retrieve the flower. Much to the council's detest, Destiny said she'd allow it, only if she went as well. The council hated that even more. No way were they sending the sick queen into the storm to only become more sick, but Destiny said she'd be fine. She was in an all-right condition and needed to be there as queen and as a mother, and that she'd take a few volunteers as well. And so they began to partake in their journey, Destiny teaching Neptune the barrier spell to shield them the best she could from the storm. They had to take many stops and struggled setting up fires to cook their food, but never gave up. It would take them weeks to reach the forest, Neptune stepping up and showing her strength as a leader to their small group. Neptune bonded much more with her mother as well. They were always close, but it was a different type of bond and trust they developed. Neptune, scared for her mom's health, and Destiny for her daughter's safety. Once they came to the forest, they began searching for the magical flower. At first, there was no sight of one, but then, right as they all began to lose hope, Neptune spotted one hidden in the small hidden enclosure. It was just one flower, but it was enough to take the seeds from, make the cure, heal the queen, and then the queen could use her magic to make more. And so with their flower they found, they began to head back. Once they made it back, they immediately turned the flower into their top doctor, who then did his plan and healed the queen. With destiny healed, they continued to plan, and soon the queen was healing everybody. People were healed, others still died or had died, including Neptune's granduncle. So after almost a year of blizzard and illness, they were cured. Now all they had to do was find a way to stop the storm. With the help of Neptune's magic, both Neptune and Destiny together were able to weather the storm enough for it to warm up and naturally end. With the storm and illness issue gone, the first thing Neptune did was call up her siblings, make sure they were all okay, and call them over. When they arrived back at Butterfly Castle, Neptune was ecstatic. She hugged each of them and made sure they were healthy. It had been so long since she had seen them in person, and couldn't be more happy to have them all back. Each of them seemed fine and just as relieved to finally be back home with their family again, but Neptune couldn't help but notice the side glances and glares Wardrobe was giving Queen Destiny, though, and wondered if something had happened between them in the time they were apart. The remainder of the year was clearing up the kingdom, traveling across it to make sure everyone got and was healed by the cure, and clearing up the remaining snow and storm. Neptune continued to show her leadership in guiding and instructing the people, and assuring them that the crown had things under control and to stay calm. The rest of the time was spent caring for her family, and Her Grand Aunt Athena was very sad due to her husband's death, as were her aunts about their father. Athena would then meet her end a little more than a year later. Neptune was very thankful for the survival of her friends and family. She was thankful for them all to be there and safe, and not to have changed too much. They had finished their studies and would be staying home. Neptune had hoped the air around her mother and, technically sister, Wardrobe would clear up, but it didn't. Wardrobe seemed to do whatever she could to avoid the queen's presence, and when they were in a room together, she was either ignoring her or giving her an upset look. On Wardrobe's 16th birthday, or the anniversary to when they found her, she did partake in the party they had planned for her, but then spent the remainder of the day in her room painting. Neptune would knock and come into her room later to see what it was. It was a strange painting of the queen, wearing a blindfold, framed, titled, "The Queen of Fates." Neptune also saw a note on the back. It was strange, but she didn't get a chance to read the whole thing before Wardrobe walked back in and stopped her, and took the painting where it disappeared to another room where Neptune would never see it again. Things weren't great between her sister and mother. She didn't know why, but there was nothing she could do about it, so she just tried to be a positive force. To celebrate the end of clearing the snow and making sure everybody was okay, Neptune enjoyed herself by going to different dimensions for some fun. It was one day when she was enjoying the lava lakes at a flammable beach, and when exploring a cave, that she met John Flameson. Now, John wasn't actually his name. His name was a strange sort of sizzling sound that only the flame people could speak, but Neptune said he looked like a John. Johns were kind, and she could tell he was a kind heart, and so the nickname stayed. Back to the main point. Neptune found John sulking in one of the caves off of the end of a lava cliff. She walked up to ask him what was wrong, and he explained he was having some issues with his family. Neptune wouldn't realize it, but John was actually one of the 3 sons of the Flame Lord family, a smaller ruling family of the lava people in the underworld. John didn't recognize Neptune as a princess either, but still kept the explanation to a minimum. He told her that in his family, each member has a role they must play, and he wasn't good at his role, and didn't want to play it, and so his family, especially his mother and older brother, all yelled at him and threatened to exile him. Neptune told him that that was awful, and it wasn't right for his family to treat him that way, that they didn't deserve him if they treated him that way. Neptune and John would then go on to talk more, exchanging numbers to only later learn of each other's positions. John would later tell Neptune of the real issue at hand, but only after he had run away from his family and denounced them. He was the 3rd son of the family, which meant it was his role to lead and enforce the military. But he was never very tough. His family weren't the kindest, and they were demanding taxes from their people, and he was supposed to send the soldiers after those who didn't pay. He was able to realize how many of the people were scared and simply didn't have the money to pay or spare, and so he had tried to stop it. His family had called him too soft and weak, and that if he didn't send their army to conquer some land, he would be exiled from their family and home, and so he ran away. Neptune was blown away and horrified by his story, and did her best to comfort him and help him find a new home. While helping John find and make a new home, Neptune would give him his name. She would also start to learn blacksmithing so she could help build non-flammable materials and architecture for him. She learned to build herself armor so she could comfort John without burning herself. While this went on, they bonded even more with each other, becoming good friends. It was then her birthday that year in 1149, at the age of 17, when Neptune would be given the crown for her bravery, leadership, and compassion. She was queen, but her mother still handled most of the royal duties, leaving Neptune time to still have fun. Neptune would use a crown close to her mother's until she turned 21 and became full-on queen. For her coronation party, Mars painted a family portrait of all of them, and Neptune loved it and hung it in the center of her room. Neptune and John's relationship was very private and unknown. They did things together in places they'd be alone to themselves, and when they weren't doing that, they were helping others. One event that is known is Neptune going to the Lusitors and reporting John's family for a potential uprising, forcing his family out of their seat of power so they couldn't hurt anyone else. Due to being so private, not much is known about how their friendship developed and when it became something more. It is known that at the beginning of 1150, Neptune started telling some people she was with her boyfriend John, but not many people really knew him. Lyra actually teased her about him potentially not being real, and Neptune told her he was, and that she could tag along any time to meet him. Lyra took her up on that offer, and after meeting John, might not have given him the benefit of the doubt, and told Neptune that she should introduce him to their parents. And so Neptune did. In Gravnock of that year, Neptune would introduce them to John, Flameson, no longer Flame Lord. Her parents just stared with wide eyes, and it was clear that they tried to smile so as not to be rude. The dinner with the family went well. Neptune brought some of her steelwork so John wouldn't burn anything. After finishing dinner and saying goodbye to John, her parents pulled her inside to speak to her. They told her that he seemed like a fine guy, sweet really, but how did she meet him, and surely she could see that things wouldn't work out. She questioned them why, and they just stared at her in horror, saying that he was made of fire. King Thomas held his branches and said he was getting kind of scared just being in a room with him. Neptune wasn't like her father, but she did have a lot of his genes, so was more susceptible to burns and heat. But she didn't care. She and John were trying it out. They had been friends for a good year and wanted to try something more. Destiny tried to smile and told her daughter that they trusted and supported her, but to please be careful. Neptune smiled and nodded, promising. Her parents, unfortunately, assumed the teens would realize for themselves that the relationship wouldn't work, but they were wrong, for at the end of the year in Spartak, Neptune, wearing armor while holding John's flaming arm, announced that they were getting engaged. Everyone at the table was staring with wide eyes and horrified glances now. To say they were dating was one thing, but marriage? Everyone questioned what was going through their heads and made them think they could get married. Destiny that night tried to convince Neptune, change her mind, get her to realize the dangers, but Neptune had her mind set. She was in love and determined. As the months passed and plans didn't change, everyone accepted it and helped prepare for the wedding. Rudely, Lyra started talking about how she was preparing for the throne, because Neptune would either die or just not be able to produce an heir. And so, on the anniversary of John meeting her parents, Neptune and John were married in Gravnock 1151. It was a marvelous wedding. Neptune hired blacksmiths and even taught some of her ladies the act so they could fireproof most things. Her dress was a beautiful, elegant white steel. The wedding was also occupied by lots of crying boys, grieving their chances with Neptune, that they honestly held onto for far too long. Lily prepared Neptune a bouquet of flaming roses in her support, and the celebration was a success. The following years were rather calm. People expected John and Neptune to attempt to birth an heir, but as far as the people knew, they hadn't yet tried, and were simply biding their time, enjoying themselves. There was an excitement, though, in the weddings for siblings throughout 1153, even the strange wedding between Mars and Wardrobe. Guess she was her sister-in-law because of marriage and through adoption? But they never really officially adopted her, did they? Neptune also fully took on the crown that year with John by her side as her king. Eventually, all her siblings gave birth to their children, but Neptune still hadn't produced an heir. Then finally, in Norvath of 1154, Neptune announced she was with child. The kingdom cheered, but from behind the scenes, many shivered in fear of the eventual future and reveal. Then 9 months later, on the night of Squartuk 77th, on a night that would have been so dark if not for the highest gleaming star, Astrid Butterfly was born. To the surprise of the kingdom, she was not a strange flame hybrid princess, but had the appearance of any of their regular princesses, except for the fact of the girl not having any arms. Astrid Butterfly was born a Star Queen and would later mark the official end to the years of inconsistency. As stated beforehand, Astrid was born without arms. She also had light pink hair and little nubs coming out of her head, assumed to be horns or antlers. She bore little 5-pointed stars on her cheeks and was a silent-born baby. A large part of Neptune's past, her identity, was family. She was so used to having people all around her, and when she was young, she would fantasize about the even larger family she would one day have. Neptune loved John with all her heart. He was the kindest man she'd ever met, and they worked so well together. But she realized what her family was warning her about, having troubles bearing children together. No one was ever told or knew about it, but Neptune had tried to have another child in 1146, but it resulted in a miscarriage and bad burns. So although Neptune always wanted a big family, she accepted her path, and that it wasn't meant to be for her. The family she had was enough. As Astrid grew, it was harder to try and assist her. Due to not having arms, she needed lots of help with things, and she got more energetic as she got older. Neptune and John just weren't able to shadow her all the time every day. So in 1159, Neptune decided to get her a lady-in-waiting. She decided to make said lady a young girl, who was able to help Astrid but also be her friend, and let poor families volunteer their daughters to be taken and cared for in the castle, and it resulted in the choice of an 8-year-old girl, Francesca Hutchinson. Francesca Hutchinson was the daughter of a baker, and Neptune was happy to take her in, and afterwards reward all of the family's extra silver for their kindness and time. Thankfully, Francesca and Astrid got along swimmingly. Francesca had lots of knowledge and talent, and was a perfect fit to both be a friend and help assist Astrid. 3 years later, in 1162, when Astrid was 8, she suddenly got arms made of fire while going on a trip by herself, and ended up resulting in a large forest fire. That will be touched on in Astrid's bio, but the result was the fear the people held for Astrid, and that Astrid held herself. People were convinced Astrid was going to lead them into a fiery era of darkness. As a result of both fear and helping Astrid be more independent, Neptune crafted some prosthetic arms for Astrid, made of steel to conceal her flames on her 12th birthday. Neptune loved her daughter and didn't let anything get in the way of spending time with the family she had. Unfortunately, this entails not caring for her own safety sometimes, and her burns continued to grow and worsen. Neptune chose to hide it though. She treated it herself the best she could, and assumed it was enough. Despite the trust and love she held for them all, she didn't want to worry them. She also didn't want to face that they were right about the dangers of her relationship. In 1168, Astrid had her wand ceremony, and Neptune watched as her hand mirror turned into a golden tiara wand. She would try to help Astrid learn to cast spells with her wand, but it was quite hard for her trying to do spells with mostly her head. It was a struggle, not very successful, but the mother and daughter bonded and had fun, and the next years continued that way, just a happy family with the occasional struggles of life. While treating her burns in 1170, Neptune realized it was getting worse and that she was becoming sickly. She still hadn't ever told anyone about it, and was sad to realize that some of the burns that needed to be healed were internal, and she would have to admit to her failed pregnancy as well if she came clean. She debated what she should do, but then her mother, former Queen Destiny, came into her room. It was a strange conversation. Destiny expressed her love towards Neptune, and that she was very proud of the family she made. Among other things, Destiny also expressed she would forgive Neptune for anything, and that if she ever needed anything, that her family was there for her. Neptune expressed her gratitude and hugged her mother, but for some unknown reason didn't tell her mother about her poor health. A few weeks later, on Splenix 25th, Neptune Butterfly would be found dead due to respiratory failure, infection, and sepsis. The kingdom mourned for their compassionate queen, who cared with grace for all others, but not enough for herself. Her parents, siblings, friends, and husband and daughter all greatly mourned her unexpected death, wishing they had known. John blamed himself, and so did others for a while, but they would eventually make up for Neptune. After her death, they decided to make a holiday after her, celebrating siblings and families. After a quaintly elegant funeral, Neptune was buried among her ancestors in the butterfly crypts. And that was the biography of Neptune Butterfly, the Compassionate, by me, Raspberry Barrel. I hope you all enjoyed this. It had a sad end, and there's lots of things that weren't mentioned here that you'll have to go and check out my DeviantArt to find out. Stories about other characters as well as more things about Neptune. Thank you all so much for listening, and I really hope you guys enjoyed. And I'll see you all next time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye!